A terrifying home invasion.
She hears this man actually entering her house.
She's thinking, does he want my baby? What is he gonna do to me?
Imagine how agonizing.
A devastating robbery.
I watched it live.
Now, this business, the latest victim of smash and grab.
What is the point of stealing those toys besides just being pure evil?
And two very unlikely heroes.
That quick-thinking grandmother who tricked a suspected scam artist.
I started to think, I hope the bad guy doesn't have a gun.
The bravery of a little boy trying to fight back.
He's literally hanging on the arm of one of the suspects.
This 5-year-old, he's a hero.
A nightmare in her own home leaves a young mom fighting for survival.
This is the middle of the day. This is on home security footage, and this is a terrifying event.
26-year-old Keen Winchester is home alone with her 2-year-old son. But suddenly, something terrifying is happening. Right outside their door.
What you see is a man who is trying desperately to get inside of this house. Who is this guy? What does he want from this mom?
Then, Keen hears a loud sound. Her maternal instinct immediately kicks in.
In this situation, the mom needed to act quickly to protect her child and herself.
We don't know what he wants. We don't know if he knows that there's a baby in the house. We don't know what his intentions are. When there's a real threat present, the adrenaline is surging even higher.
Keen grabs her son and bolts.
As a mother, she's thinking, I gotta do everything I possibly can to protect my child from this potential threat.
She hides in a second-floor bathroom, then frantically dials for help.
She's on the phone with 911, with dispatch, when she hears this man actually entering her house. You just don't know in these situations who is with someone else, if there's a car waiting or someone else is maybe on a different part of the house.
Waiting for the police to arrive is unbearable.
She's thinking, does he want my baby? What is he gonna do to me? And is there anything in here that I can use to defend myself and my child?
It takes 10 endless minutes, but when officers do get there, they arrest the frightening stranger on the spot. Police later discover he is under the influence of drugs.
It's dangerous and potentially lethal when you're driven by a need to get high on substances, when you are in physiological withdrawal. Because when you're in that state, you don't care if you hurt someone else. Your judgment is completely thrown off.
Keen releases the video from her doorbell camera to the media.
Honestly, I was shaking. I was just breathing very hard, shaking, begging the dispatcher to please get his cops here, please.
Imagine how agonizing those 10 minutes were.
A worst case scenario is if she wasn't barricaded and if he had access to this child and to this woman, someone with this type of rage, who knows what would have happened. This mom shared this clip and this information on her social media page to help spread the word and to help warn those around her.
The scary ordeal quickly goes viral. She also begs his friends to get him help.
She does show compassion for this person, hoping that he does receive the help that he needs and doesn't target anyone else.
But the trauma this young mom endured is likely to linger.
Keen Winchester was too afraid to stay in her home after this event. She ended up staying with her mother-in-law. She did not feel safe in her own home. When people go through similar type of traumatic events, they really lose their sense of safety, especially when your home has been invaded. You're not able to sleep at night. You don't feel as if you can let your guard down.
And no matter where it happens, when glass shatters, it's almost always the beginning of something bad. You're looking at a brazen burglary caught on camera.
This happened just before 10 o'clock Sunday night.
It is so many people, we can hardly even count them, running in and out of the store.
We're looking at surveillance footage from inside a local shoe store called Valid Kit. Right after they closed for the night.
All of a sudden, you see the glass shatter and all hell breaks loose.
It's a wild late-night smash-and-grab break-in.
10, 20, maybe 30 people running in and out of the store.
They're just grabbing anything in sight and making off with it.
But they don't realize that the owner, Keith Cannon, can see their every move. His phone is connected to the store's security cameras.
And when I looked at my phone, I just seen people just ambushing through there, just taking all the merchandise, all of that. I watched it live.
It is a full-on spectacle in this shoe store right now. It's madness.
Keith keeps his high-ticket items in the back behind a locked steel door. But these thieves are prepared.
Somehow they knew to go to the back bathroom, kick a hole through the drywall, climb through the piping to get to the other side of that door. It just had to be somebody that, like, a customer maybe, K-Sit, see how to get through what.
And whoever has tipped the criminals off, they have very specific information.
For the kids in the neighborhood, we had a lounge area where we had refreshments, drinks, snacks, and they come in there and play the PS5. They don't have to necessarily buy nothing. We just wanted to have a friendly environment. We had that drilled to the wall. They snatched it right off the wall.
But the last move this brazen gang makes is by far the hardest blow.
Now, if you look right here, you can see the burglars removing a box. This box is not merchandise from the store.
They stole toys that were being collected for a local toy drive. I understand wanting the shoes, but what is the point of stealing those toys for any reason besides just being pure evil?
The thing that hurt me the most with the toy drive is they wasn't just stealing from me. You know, they were stealing from kids that actually needed the toys and was looking forward to having those toys for the holidays.
With their bags stuffed with toys, the PS5, and hundreds of pairs of shoes, the bold thieves run off. In just 4 minutes, they have left this community-minded store in shambles. And the next day, the shocking footage is all over the news.
On camera, $100,000 worth of Nike shoes stolen just like that.
In this business, the latest victim of smash and grab.
For Keith, it's not just the loss of merchandise. This crime has a devastating ripple effect.
It affected my employees greatly because they all had kids they had to feed, and it was right before the holidays. So I wasn't able to stay open for them to make money.
Making it even harder, it isn't the first time this has happened.
Unfortunately, this was probably the third or fourth time we got robbed within 6 months, because the store haven't even been open a full year yet.
And for someone as giving as Keith, it's a deeply personal blow.
It breaks my heart because I don't only do this for money, I do this for the love. I really love shoes, I really love networking with people. I really like just showing people that they can always beat the odds, because I don't have a college degree. I don't have a degree in business. It's something I just had a passion in, and I just stepped out on faith and tried it. I did a program where kids in the neighborhood, they could bring a report card in, they can bring in a book report they did, anything positive that they did, they can come in and get a free pair of shoes.
This video is so upsetting to watch, not only because you feel for the store owners, but especially that they're stealing from a store that really is trying to do a lot of good in their community.
But the community has Keith's back, too.
The toys that they stole, the community reached out and donated a lot of money to the GoFundMe, where we were able to get these kids Christmas toys right before the holidays.
Unfortunately, the case remains unsolved, and there have been no arrests. But wherever they are, Keith would love to have a word with these toy-stealing criminals.
I wouldn't even want to send them to jail, honestly. I want to see what's going in their brain. For you to break into a store, risk your life, risk your freedom for a little bit of nothing.
Come on.
Another case of callous theft also elicits outrage because it involves an innocent grandmother. This one begins when a doorbell camera catches a courier picking up a package.
Hello? Hi. I'm supposed to ask you the invoice number?
Okay, have a good one. But this isn't what it looks like.
A Long Island grandmother has outsmarted some would-be thieves.
I really wasn't scared because I never thought it would get that far, you know?
For Jean Ebert, it begins as a routine day until she picks up the phone.
And this guy is on here crying, "Oh, Grandma, I'm in trouble. I've been in a car accident."
The man who claims he's her grandson says he's been arrested and needs $8,000 for bail. But there's one problem with his story.
I don't have a grandson old enough to drive. So I knew it was a scammer right from the beginning. So I said to him, listen, don't tell your mother. She's going to be mad. Let me handle this. You know, I played along.
What the scammer doesn't know is that Jean is a retired 911 phone operator.
I worked for 911 for a long time. I was a police dispatcher, call taker dispatcher. 911 people are kind of, you need certain skills to do it. You know, you're the calm in the chaos. You know, you have to stay calm.
And she knows a thing or two about scams.
I know the scammers are out there. I mean, I heard from people all over the world whose parents have fallen for this scam.
So when the man tells her he's sending an associate to pick up the money, she immediately knows what to do.
She gets the police involved.
They said when he comes to the door, hand him the envelope and then step away.
It's a trap. The police rush over, and when the scammer shows up, they are already hiding inside Jean's house.
All she can do is wait and see if he takes the bait.
So then I started to think, I hope nothing happens. I hope the bad guy doesn't have a gun.
Hello? Hi. I'm supposed to ask you the invoice number?
Jean hands over the envelope as instructed, except it isn't filled with cash.
The envelope was full of paper towels folded up.
Okay, have a good one. Okay.
Then I backed away and they did their thing.
The whole time, the man who called claiming to be Jean's grandson is on hold.
I still had the scammer on the phone, so.
Yeah, I'm here. Hey, guess what?
And I guess he heard the commotion.
Hi. Anybody want to talk to the guy on the phone?
And wasn't in contact with his guy anymore, so he hung up quick. I was just glad it was over. It was a little interesting.
Jean's bravery is an instant news hit.
A good turn to that quick-thinking grandmother who tricked a suspected scam artist.
Police say the suspect was arrested and charged with attempted grand larceny in the 3rd degree.
A story like this is universal no matter where you live or anything like that, because we all have grandparents that we're worried about, or we all have somebody elderly in our life that we don't want to be scammed. So it's kind of a good lesson learned, and also to let those scammers know, we're on to you.
For Jean, it's all a bit overwhelming.
That night, I had the local news here. The people, they came with their little trucks and they did like little videos with me. And I was just shocked at how fast something can go viral. And I knew he was a real scammer. I just knew he wasn't going to scam me. My son was home and he's like, Ma, it's on YouTube. You have this many hits.
And the lesson here? Don't mess with grandmas who can beat you at your own game.
Born grandma 1, bad guy 0.
Anybody want to talk to the guy on the phone?
In Indiana, it's a different kind of unlikely hero who throws criminals off their game.
These alleged thieves picked a home to invade. People are disturbed by the video.
A violent invasion. Thwarted by something very unexpected. A group of armed men invade a home and find a very unlikely deterrent.
I don't think that any 5-year-old should probably try to be a hero, but in this particular situation, it seemed to work.
So we're looking at footage from inside the home of Tamika Reed. She's currently ironing some clothes while her 5-year-old son plays with his toys nearby.
And out of nowhere, 4 guys kick in the door, rush towards her.
The panicked mom screams and begs the intruders not to shoot.
1 second, Tamika's ironing clothes. The next minute, she's fighting for her life.
She's terrified they will hurt her son, but she never expects what happens next.
5-year-old David sees what's going on, and he decides he's going to act.
Look at the bottom of the screen. This little boy is about to defend his home.
Starts punching and hitting them, which is scary. They're 3, 4, 5 times this 5-year-old size.
As David bravely battles the dangerous men, Tamika makes a calculated move.
It almost seems like she actively works her way out of that living room area with the suspects in hopes of drawing them towards her and away from David.
I have to imagine that Tamika's thinking, I just want to keep me and my son alive.
Her plan works. The men follow her into the next room, leaving David alone. But this brave kid isn't done yet.
At that moment, you can see David looking around, trying to find his weapon of choice, and he chooses his toy cars.
I think they're so caught off guard by this 5-year-old not being terrified at all.
That's not enough. David realizes that the toy didn't do the job, so he physically attacks the suspect, punching him multiple times. David's right in the middle of everything. He's literally hanging on the arm of one of the suspects, who, by the way, is in possession of a gun. But David has no fear. He's there to protect his mom.
We look at this 5-year-old and we can say he's a hero, but it's also really scary. These guys have broken in the middle of the day. They are dangerous.
When the suspects come in, clearly they have bad intentions, but as soon as they're engaged by David, they realize that whatever it isn't worth what they're getting into right now, and they decide to flee the area.
The men who came in look pretty young, and maybe that's the reason he didn't get hurt, because they saw themselves in that 5-year-old kid.
Whatever the reason may be, David's a hero.
And David's heroics get viral attention.
The video was posted today by police to try to get more leads in the case, and it went viral. People are disturbed by the video, and they also are quick to notice the bravery of a little boy trying to fight back.
Tamika also speaks to the media about the traumatizing ordeal.
My thing was, I need to get him out the house before they do something to my son.
But the media praises David, comparing him to his favorite superhero.
A lot of people are saying you're just like Batman, you're a superhero.
Although police have yet to identify the suspects, if they are caught, they'll face stiff charges.
Armed robbery, felony assault with a dangerous weapon. They're gonna have some issues for sure, and I hope they are caught.
And as terrifying as this would be for any parent, Tamika definitely had the right instincts.
I think anytime you're dealing with a home invasion, the best thing to do is try to run if you can, and if you can't, just try to cooperate. Humanize yourself as much as you can. Say your name, say your child's name. The more they think that you are a real person with a real life, the less likely they are to take your life.
And luckily, this house had its very own defender.
I definitely think there's a future in law enforcement for David. You can clearly tell he's a person of great character, and I can't wait to see what he accomplishes.
Out of here, go!
Thieves who have no fear.
Caught on camera, bold crooks.
Right in people's driveways, right in broad daylight.
They weren't even trying to hide their faces.
An attack that sends chills down your spine.
Like a scene out of a horror movie.
I'll be back. You didn't know what she's going to do.
A disturbing kidnapping.
She's being dragged out the front door.
This man took her. It has been a frantic couple of hours.
And cars used as weapons.
Out of nowhere, boom.
Inside, it's a complete disaster.
Unbelievable crimes caught on camera.
Get out of here, go!
You won't believe what you're about to see.
This is happening right in people's driveways.
This crime happens in a matter of 2 minutes.
One of the robbers pulls a gun and points it at him.
This is a small city just outside San Francisco, the middle of the day, and there are 2 men seen approaching this vehicle.
They look like they're here to repair the car.
And then you start hearing these really loud power tools.
These guys are thieves, and they want something very specific.
A catalytic converter is something that essentially changes pollutants to emissions.
They can be a hot ticket item because of the metals that exist inside of them.
Platinum, palladium, rhodium.
And what these offenders will do, they'll cut them off, they'll sell them to a scrapyard.
And it go for a lot of money, and that's why catalytic converters are stolen so much.
This is happening right in broad daylight, so they really don't care.
It's really simple to steal catalytic converters, unfortunately. You just need regular power tools that any person probably has in their garage.
When the homeowner, Michelle Morris Richardson, releases her security footage, the story spreads all over the news.
2 bold crooks stealing a catalytic converter from a Stockton family's car.
They weren't even trying to hide their faces. They weren't wearing gloves. They looked right into the Ring camera. They were just kind of like, yeah, we're here, we're gonna take it.
And this isn't just isolated to certain cities, this is everywhere.
Across the country, catalytic converter theft is on the rise, increasing a whopping 1,200% between 2019 and 2022. In Connecticut, thieves literally roll a woman's car out of her driveway so they have better access.
This poor woman's car is left in the middle of the street. This crime happens in a matter of 2 minutes. The local news in this case interviews the car's owner, and she had a lot to say.
I know my car, since it's a Honda, is a target, so I'm worried about that too. Like, what if I fix it and they just come back and take it again?
The problem is so bad that some car owners are fighting back, like this man in Florida.
This guy has already had his catalytic converter stolen once. He comes running down the stairs. One of the robbers pulls a gun and points it at him. He just starts pelting rocks at the guys. He knew how much money he had already spent replacing one catalytic converter. If I ended up having to pay thousands out of pocket, I might resort to throwing rocks too.
Catalytic theft is so prevalent that many car owners are being forced to take preemptive action.
If you're having to park on the street, you can really prevent this theft by having a piece of metal that's welded and protects the catalytic converter.
But as long as it remains lucrative, these bold driveway thefts are likely to continue.
Sadly, nowhere is safe for catalytic converters.
And being targeted at home, the place where you are supposed to feel safe and secure, is something no one wants to experience. This is a bizarre attack.
Like a scene out of a horror movie.
I can't imagine someone doing this to my home.
It's a horrifying scene that unfolds just before 5 p.m. in Pasadena.
This is an ordinary day on a quiet street.
All of a sudden, we see a woman walking up to a door. There's something strange about her. It looks like she's wielding an axe. Surveillance video catches her as she's breaking these windows open.
From inside, there's a piercing scream. It's the homeowner's mother.
She's by herself inside the house when all of a sudden, something of this magnitude happens.
Her scream startles the axe-wielding woman. And there's something else.
Horrifyingly, we discover that right next to one of those windows is a newborn baby in a bassinet.
The grandmother is babysitting her 6-week-old grandchild.
Just in time, she gets to the bassinet, pulls the baby out before the woman breaks the window. Shards of glass fall into the bassinet.
This is a grandmother who has excellent instincts.
Questions? Questions, anyone?
After some disturbing muttering, the axe-wielding woman makes an ominous threat.
I'll be back! Get out!
I can't imagine someone doing this to my home
I'll be back!
and then shouting out that they may be back again. It's really hard to process.
She doesn't leave. She pauses, then turns back towards the house.
What's absurd is that the homeowners don't even know who this woman is.
Off camera, she continues to wreak havoc.
You start to wonder, does this person have paranoid delusions? Are what they're thinking based in reality?
Then, just as suddenly as it began, it's over. The next day, after the frightened homeowners release their surveillance video, it dominates the news.
A horrifying experience for a family in Pasadena. A woman
with a pickaxe came banging on their front door.
Police say the estimated damages total about $20,000.
The homeowner describes the petrifying incident from his mother-in-law's perspective.
She immediately, first instinct, ran, grabbed the baby. And then as she looked up, she sees this crazy lady with a massive pickaxe about to swing it again.
Police later discover the woman, 65-year-old Beverly Baker, casually walking the neighborhood with the axe slung over her shoulder.
Most people, when they do something of this nature, they understand the repercussions, they run, they flee. It's the opposite in this case. She likely is not rooted in reality.
Assuming a mental illness is involved, police proceed with caution.
Law enforcement are trained to de-escalate situations when the person is violent or aggressive due to a mental health condition.
After a 30-minute standoff, she's taken into custody and charged with felony vandalism. There's no obvious motive, and it seems to be a random attack. But it shakes these homeowners to the core.
The best part of this is that no one was hurt. The baby wasn't injured, the grandmother wasn't injured, and that's really, all you can ask for in a terrible situation like this.
Sometimes, though, criminals are so focused on their targets, it's impossible to get away.
To an alarming abduction, all of it caught on camera.
This man took her.
She's being dragged out the front door by someone who was armed and dangerous.
It's a shocking abduction in the middle of the day.
Don't let this person simply drive away.
It begins as a typical workday for the young clerk in this store.
You think about a workplace, it's sort of a haven of sorts, not a place where you would be attacked.
But this young woman is on edge because someone has been watching her every move.
This person has been, over the last several weeks, has been following her, stalking her, following her around in the car, trying to find out where she lives.
And when she sees him outside of her workplace, she is terrified.
The suspect was armed with a hammer.
The clerk immediately hits the store's silent alarm.
When he walked through the door that day, she knew that there was trouble, and that's why the silent alarm was triggered.
The security camera does not capture everything, but what it does show is difficult to watch. The man violently forces the woman out of the store.
It's happening in broad daylight. This attack could have happened to any one of us. I feel for this woman.
It is very disturbing to see a woman being drugged out of our store.
Equally disturbing, someone walks right by, as if the kidnapping isn't even happening.
A postal worker who walks into the store and almost trips or steps over top of her and then places the mail on the counter and walks out.
For whatever reason, it appears that he is completely ignoring what is going on.
He could have helped her, but he just kind of passes over her and goes about his business.
The woman puts up a desperate fight, but as detectives later explain at a press conference, her stalker was determined.
He was forcing her in the car using his body weight, striking her, holding her hands down, pushing her in. He was seen wielding a hammer in his right hand, making striking motions to her lower part of her body.
If anyone is going to be forced into the car, it is not going to be good. They may say they're not going to kill you, but they will kill you.
By the time police arrive about 20 minutes later, the victim is gone.
Police learn that the abducted woman is 28 years old. And whoever her hammer-wielding stalker is, their best lead to finding him is the car he forced her into.
Police move quickly. They release a BOLA, which is a be on the lookout announcement for this particular vehicle.
That helps police identify the suspect almost immediately. 29-year-old Jose Eduardo Gasiola Caro. Police warn that Caro is considered armed and dangerous. 2 hours after the abduction, he takes the terrified woman to a cemetery, where she bravely manages to escape. Someone spots her and gets her to a local hospital.
According to reports, she may have been hit several times, not just as she was being dragged into the vehicle, but also once she was inside of the car with him.
As police launch a manhunt for Caro, they reveal that he held the victim hostage inside the car with a knife to her throat. At times, he threatened to kill her.
This was an intense 2 hours. She was threatened and things were done to her.
So where is this violent stalker now? And how can this woman be certain she is safe? Hours after a kidnapped woman bravely escapes from a man who has stalked and terrorized her, police track down her attacker.
Tonight, the manhunt and the takedown police just made.
When the security footage hits the news, it catches everyone's attention.
A dramatic end to an alarming abduction, all of it caught on camera.
As this news conference is underway, the hammer-wielding kidnapper was tasered and then taken into custody.
Jose Eduardo Gasiola Caro is charged with a host of felonies, including attempted premeditated murder, kidnapping to commit rape, assault with a deadly weapon, and fleeing police.
At this point, the suspect has been convicted and is now sentenced and is serving 22 years behind bars.
The case is a frightening reminder to all women to never take stalking lightly.
This gentleman made mention that he knew where some of her family members lived and made some threats against those family members.
Stalkers tend to have this idea that the object of their obsession is an object. It's a thing for them to use and abuse. That's scary because this woman could have lost her life.
It's also scary when crooks are hell-bent on getting what they want, no matter what.
Out of nowhere, boom.
This involves cars used for violence.
Inside, it's a complete disaster.
It's used as this weapon through the front of the store.
It's a quiet night outside of the Valero gas station in Texas. The surveillance video picks up a white vehicle, and then out of nowhere,
They blast right through the front of the store. Back out and go at it again.
Luckily, there are not a lot of people in the store.
This was in the early morning hours. Then thankfully, the two people who were inside, they managed to escape very, very quickly.
The driver leaps out to head into the mangled building.
And then just starts ransacking the gas station store.
The only thing he takes, the store's one cash register.
Look, if you want to rob a store, it's terrible, but can you just take it without completely destroying someone's property? All of this damage for one cash register. It just can't be worth it.
Then, as quickly as he appeared, he flees. But there is one important clue.
So what's unique about this vehicle is that it was allegedly stolen from the local school district.
It was found later down the road. He had just ditched it. And the fact that he was even able to steal this vehicle in the first place is kind of amazing.
Police are unable to locate the driver. The next day, local news broadcasts the damage.
If you take a look behind me, you can see right now workers are trying to board up the front doors of this Valero gas station.
I heard it through the grapevine that someone had destroyed my store. And I say my store because it's the neighborhood store.
This is the local store that all of the residents use in this small town, and there was over $100,000 in damages done to it.
2 days later, Chadwick Allen McMillan is caught in a stolen vehicle trying to burglarize a different store. After a lengthy police chase, he is arrested.
At this hour, investigators confirm they believe McMillan is behind the Valero smash and grab from Monday morning and the high-speed police chase with the stolen vehicle yesterday.
And it turns out McMillan is an ex-con with a lengthy rap sheet who was released from prison just a few months earlier.
Here we go again. This is another video, this time out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Instead of driving into the store, they're backing in.
Completely shattering it.
Luckily, once again, no one was harmed in this incident. The store was closed.
Two guys get out, and all they start grabbing are tobacco and CBD products. All of this damage for just some tobacco and CBD. It seems so juvenile.
This seems like a very high risk, very low reward crime.
Loot in hand, the two thieves return to the car and make their escape. The story is big news in Minneapolis.
Luckily, no one got hurt. That's obviously my first concern. When I saw that, I just immediately thought, must be dumb kids.
So far, there have been no arrests.
You have to wonder how desperate people are to be causing all of this damage for such a low reward. This isn't a giant heist of the Mona Lisa. It's products that are worth a few $100.
And it's a reminder to always be aware of your surroundings.
If you're in a store and you see a car backing up, get out of the way.
In the autumn of 1992, the Italian region of Umbria was the kind of place where fear still felt like something that belonged somewhere else. Nestled among rolling hills, vineyards, stone villages, and winding country roads, it was a landscape that seemed untouched by the darker headlines that occasionally emerged from larger cities. Families knew one another. Children played outdoors. Parents worried about scraped knees, bad weather, and ordinary childhood mishaps. The idea that a predator might be moving silently through their communities was almost unimaginable. But in early October of that year, something happened that would permanently alter the way many people in the region viewed safety. Trust in childhood itself. The story began with a disappearance. On October 4th, 1992, 4-year-old Simone Allegretti vanished in the countryside between Foligno and Bavagna. At first, there was no reason to believe that the situation was anything more than a terrible accident. Young children wander. They become distracted. They lose their way. Across Europe and around the world, countless missing child reports end with a frightened child being found safe hours later. That hope sustained the first hours of the search. Family members looked for him. Neighbors joined the effort. Local authorities began organizing searches of nearby areas. Every minute that passed increased the anxiety, but the possibility remained that Simone would be found alive. No one yet knew that this case was about to become one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in modern Italian history. As daylight faded and concern deepened, the search expanded. People examined roads, fields, wooded areas, and isolated paths. Volunteers gathered with a shared purpose, united by the determination to bring a little boy home. Yet somewhere beyond the public search effort, another individual was watching events unfold. Someone who already knew exactly where Simone was. Someone who knew that the searchers were looking in vain. Someone who had no intention of remaining completely invisible. Because before Simone's body was discovered, investigators received something deeply unsettling. A letter. It was anonymous. It had been left in a public telephone booth. And according to investigators, the person who wrote it claimed responsibility for the crime. The significance of that letter cannot be overstated. In many homicide investigations, police spend days, weeks, or months attempting to identify a suspect. They reconstruct timelines, gather witness statements, and follow countless leads. Usually, the killer tries to remain hidden. This individual chose something different. The writer wanted to be heard. The letter reportedly contained information that only the perpetrator could have known. Most chillingly, it described the location where Simone's body could be found. Imagine the moment investigators realized what they were holding. An anonymous message. A confession. Directions to a dead child. The implications were horrifying. If the information was accurate, then the writer was not merely a witness. He was the killer. And if he was willing to communicate directly with authorities, what did that reveal about his state of mind? Was he seeking attention? Recognition? Control? Or was there another reason entirely? At that stage, no one had answers. But there was one more detail in the letter that transformed an already tragic case into something far more terrifying. The writer reportedly declared that he would kill again. Those words hung over the investigation like a storm cloud. At the time, authorities could not know whether the threat was genuine. Criminals sometimes exaggerate. They boast. They attempt to frighten investigators. They manufacture an image of themselves that is larger than reality. Yet when a child is already dead, every threat must be taken seriously. The letter suggested something that communities throughout Umbria were not prepared to confront. The possibility that Simone Allegretti had not been the victim of an isolated crime. The possibility that an unknown predator was still out there. The possibility that another child might already be in danger. Soon afterward, investigators located Simone's body in the area described by the anonymous writer. The discovery confirmed the nightmare. The letter had been authentic. The person who wrote it possessed direct knowledge of the crime. The search for a missing child had become a homicide investigation, and a community that had been hoping for a miracle suddenly found itself confronting a terrifying reality. The death of a 4-year-old child is devastating under any circumstances. But this case carried additional elements that made it uniquely disturbing. There was the letter. There was the confession. And there was the promise of future violence. Those elements transformed public perception almost immediately. People were no longer dealing solely with grief. They were dealing with fear. The fear spread quickly through Foligno and the surrounding areas. Parents began reassessing routines they had previously taken for granted. Children who once moved freely through neighborhoods were watched more closely. Ordinary activities suddenly seemed different. A short walk, a bicycle ride, an afternoon outdoors. Things that had once appeared harmless now carried a sense of uncertainty. The psychological impact of an unidentified offender is difficult to measure. When a criminal has been caught, communities can begin the process of healing. When a criminal remains unidentified, imagination fills the gaps. Every stranger becomes suspicious. Every rumor gains traction. Every unexplained incident feels potentially connected. And in this case, there was a particularly troubling reason for public anxiety. The killer appeared confident. The letter suggested an individual who was not merely committing violence, but communicating about it. That distinction mattered. Many offenders tried desperately to avoid attention. This writer appeared willing to engage with authorities. The message projected a sense of control, a sense of superiority, almost as if the author believed he was directing part of the investigation himself. For detectives, this created an enormous challenge. They were searching for someone they could not identify. Someone who had left a message but little else. Someone who seemed to understand the impact his words would have. As investigators worked the case, the media began reporting on developments. Stories circulated throughout the region. The details were impossible to ignore. A missing child, a murdered child, an anonymous confession, a threat of future killings. The narrative possessed all the ingredients necessary to capture public attention. But unlike a crime novel or a film, there was no certainty of resolution. The killer was still unknown. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The investigation continued. The fear remained. And the questions multiplied. Who had written the letter? Why had he chosen to reveal himself at all? What kind of person kills a child and then directs authorities to the body? Most importantly, what did he mean when he promised that he would kill again? At the center of the mystery stood a figure no one could yet identify. He had no face, no public name, no confirmed history, only a voice preserved in a letter. a voice that had emerged briefly from the shadows before disappearing once more. Investigators pursued leads. Potential suspects emerged. Attention shifted from one possibility to another. But certainty remained elusive. The case resisted easy answers. Meanwhile, families throughout Umbria were left to live with a new reality. The murder of Simone Allegretti had done more than claim a young life. It had shattered a sense of security. The crime introduced a disturbing possibility into everyday life. That danger could exist where people least expected it. And perhaps the most frightening aspect of all was that the anonymous writer's warning had not yet been disproven. The threat remained unresolved. The promise lingered. Somewhere, the author of that letter continued his life. He walked among ordinary people. He passed through ordinary streets. He remained hidden. For nearly a year, investigators searched for answers. For nearly a year, the community waited. And for nearly a year, nobody knew whether the killer would strike again. Then, in August of 1993, the nightmare returned. A second child disappeared. And suddenly, the words written in that anonymous letter no longer sounded like a threat. They sounded like a prophecy. Before we can understand how investigators finally uncovered the identity of the man who would become known as the Monster of Foligno, we must first understand the victims whose lives were taken, the community that lived under the shadow of fear, and the troubled background of the man who would eventually confess to both murders. Because every true crime story begins with a crime. But the most important stories begin with the people whose lives were forever changed by it. When people remember notorious criminal cases, there is often a tendency for the perpetrator to become the central figure. Newspapers print the killer's name. Television programs analyze the killer's motives. Books attempt to explain the killer's psychology. Over time, the individual responsible for the violence can become larger in public memory than the lives that were taken. But every true crime story begins somewhere else. It begins with victims. It begins with families. It begins with ordinary lives interrupted by something unimaginable. In the case that would eventually become known throughout Italy as the story of the Monster of Foligno, there were two victims whose names deserve to be remembered above all others: Simone Allegretti and Lorenzo Paolucci. Before becoming names in police reports, before becoming subjects of newspaper headlines, they were simply children. Children with families. Children with futures. Children who should have had the opportunity to grow up. The first victim was Simone Allegretti. In October 1992, Simone was only 4 years old. At that age, a child exists in a world defined largely by trust. The world is still small. Family members provide safety. Familiar places feel secure. Daily routines create stability. A 4-year-old cannot understand concepts such as criminal predators or calculated violence. The responsibility for protection belongs entirely to the adults around them. That reality is one reason crimes against young children generate such profound emotional reactions. Society instinctively recognizes the imbalance involved. A child possesses neither the experience nor the capacity to defend against the intentions of an adult offender. On October 4th, 1992, Simone disappeared in the countryside between Foligno and Bavagna. The available records do not provide detailed accounts of his final hours, and it is important not to speculate beyond established facts. What is known is that his disappearance triggered a search effort involving family members, local residents, and authorities. During those first hours, hope remained alive. Missing child investigations often begin with uncertainty rather than certainty. People search nearby roads. They call relatives. They revisit familiar locations. They tell themselves that there must be a reasonable explanation. Somewhere within that process, Simone's family likely experienced the emotional cycle familiar to many families facing a disappearance. concern turning into fear, fear turning into panic, and panic turning into dread as each passing hour failed to produce answers. Then came the discovery that transformed uncertainty into tragedy. Simone's body was found after investigators received the anonymous letter from the killer. The discovery did more than confirm a homicide. It ended every possibility of a different outcome. Every hope that the child might return home safely vanished. For Simone's family, the event marked a permanent dividing line between life before October 1992 and life after it. It is difficult to fully comprehend the scale of loss experienced by parents who lose a child. Criminal investigations often focus on evidence, suspects, and legal proceedings. But beneath all of those processes lies a human reality that never disappears. A child's bedroom remains. Photographs remain. Birthdays continue to arrive each year. The world moves forward, but the absence remains. For the community surrounding Foligno, Simone's death carried another consequence. It shattered assumptions about safety. Residents were forced to confront a terrifying possibility. Someone capable of murdering a child had been operating among them. Worse still, that person had not been identified. The anonymous letter suggested that the killer remained free. Every parent in the region understood what that meant. If one child had been targeted, another could be targeted as well. The fear was not abstract. It was immediate. It affected daily decisions. It changed routines. It altered the relationship between parents and the outside world. Children who once enjoyed freedom increasingly found themselves under close supervision. Activities that had previously seemed harmless suddenly appeared risky. The atmosphere of uncertainty spread far beyond Simone's family. It became a burden shared by an entire region. Yet even as fear spread through Umbria, investigators struggled to identify the person responsible. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The anonymous letter continued to haunt the case. Its warning lingered in public memory. The author had claimed he would kill again. At the time, nobody knew whether that statement represented a genuine threat or merely the boast of a disturbed individual seeking attention. Unfortunately, the answer would arrive less than a year later. The second victim was Lorenzo Paolucci. On August 7, 1993, Lorenzo left home riding his bicycle. Unlike Simone, Lorenzo was 13 years old. He stood at a different stage of childhood. 13 is an age associated with increasing independence. Adolescents begin exploring the world beyond direct parental supervision. They develop routines of their own. They gain confidence. They move through their communities with greater freedom. That freedom is often viewed as a natural part of growing up. It represents trust between families and the environments in which they live. Lorenzo never returned home. As with Simone's case, concern quickly escalated into alarm. Hours passed. Questions multiplied. Then came the devastating discovery. Lorenzo's body was found near Casale in the Foligno area. The significance of this second crime extended beyond the immediate tragedy. For investigators and residents alike, it appeared to confirm the worst fears generated by the anonymous letter nearly a year earlier. The threat had not been empty. The killer had struck again. For many people in Umbria, the second murder was even more psychologically devastating than the first. The first crime had introduced fear. The second confirmed that the fear had been justified. A single murder can sometimes be viewed as an isolated event. Two murders suggest a pattern. Two murdered children suggested that a predator had been active for months while successfully avoiding capture. The emotional impact was immense. Parents who had spent months worrying suddenly found their concerns validated in the most terrible way possible. The second killing intensified public anxiety and increased pressure on investigators. Communities wanted answers. Families wanted protection. Authorities needed results. Yet while Simone and Lorenzo became victims of a criminal investigation, another figure remained largely invisible to the public. the man who would eventually confess to both murders. His name was Luigi Ciotti. What made the case particularly unsettling was that Ciotti did not initially appear to fit popular images of a dangerous criminal. There were no dramatic confrontations with police before his arrest. There was no public reputation for violence that caused immediate suspicion. The reality proved far more disturbing because it reflected a truth found in many criminal cases. Dangerous individuals do not always appear dangerous. Luigi Ciotti was born on February 27, 1968, in Narni, Italy. His birth name was Antonio Rossi. Almost immediately, his life began under difficult circumstances. His biological mother was unable to care for him and left him in an orphanage shortly after his birth. The significance of early childhood experiences has long been studied by psychologists, social workers, and researchers. However, understanding difficult beginnings should never be confused with excusing future crimes. Millions of people endure hardship without harming others. Nevertheless, the details of Ciotti's early life would later become relevant during legal proceedings because they form part of the discussion surrounding his psychological development. For approximately the first 6 or 7 years of his life, he remained in institutional care. Eventually, he was adopted by a physician named Ermanno Ciotti. Following the adoption, his name became Luigi Ciotti. On the surface, adoption often represents a new beginning. It can provide stability, family structure, and opportunities unavailable in institutional settings. Yet available information suggests that Ciotti continued to experience significant psychological difficulties as he grew older. Reports described him as socially isolated. He reportedly struggled to integrate with others. Observers later noted signs of emotional instability appearing relatively early in his life. During the later court proceedings, defense lawyers presented claims that Ciotti had been sexually abused while living in the orphanage. These claims became part of broader discussions regarding his mental state and psychological history. It is important to emphasize that such allegations emerged within the legal context and were presented as part of arguments concerning his background, whether viewed through a legal, psychological, or a social lens. These claims did not alter responsibility for the crimes themselves. Instead, they formed part of attempts to understand the factors that may have shaped his development. One of the most difficult challenges in true crime analysis is maintaining a distinction between explanation and justification. Human beings naturally seek causes. We want to understand why terrible acts occur. We search for origins. We look for patterns. Yet identifying influences does not reduce the suffering of victims, nor does it erase accountability. In the case of Luigi Ciotti, discussions of abandonment, isolation, emotional instability, and alleged childhood abuse became part of the broader effort to understand his life. But none of those factors changed the reality that 2 children were dead. As investigators would later discover, psychological concerns also emerged during professional evaluations. Experts concluded that Ciotti displayed a pathological fixation on young boys. Those findings would become central during legal proceedings. However, at the time of the murders, the public knew none of this. Residents of Umbria did not see a future defendant. They did not see psychiatric evaluations. They did not see courtroom debates. They saw only the consequences of an unknown offender's actions. They saw grieving families. They saw frightened communities. They saw a killer who remained hidden. That uncertainty was perhaps the most frightening aspect of all. Somewhere within the region lived the person responsible for Simone's death. Somewhere within the region lived the person responsible for Lorenzo's death. Neighbors did not know who he was. Investigators did not know who he was. The media did not know who he was. The only certainty was that he had already demonstrated a willingness to kill children. Looking back now, it is tempting to view the story as inevitable. We know the ending. We know the identity of the man eventually arrested. We know the name that would become associated with one of Italy's most disturbing child murder cases. But in 1993, none of that certainty existed. There were only questions. 2 murdered children, 1 anonymous confession, 1 region living in fear, and an unknown man whose face remained hidden behind the growing legend of the monster of Foligno. In the next chapter of this story, we will follow the events that transformed fear into panic, examine how the second murder altered the course of the investigation, and explore the mistakes that ultimately brought the elusive killer out of the shadows and into police custody. For nearly every community that experiences a notorious criminal case, there's a moment when life seems to divide into 2 distinct periods, before and after. Before the crime, people remember ordinary routines. After the crime, those same routines acquire a different meaning. Streets become associated with fear. Familiar places become connected to tragedy. Memories that once felt comforting become inseparable from questions that may never be fully answered. For the communities surrounding Foligno and the wider Umbria region, that dividing line began in October 1992. What initially appeared to be the disappearance of a young child would eventually evolve into one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in modern Italian history. Yet at the beginning, nobody knew they were witnessing the emergence of a serial child killer. Nobody knew that a mysterious letter would become one of the defining elements of the case. And nobody knew that the author of that letter would keep his promise to kill again. The first incident began on October 4th, 1992. 4-year-old Simone Allegretti disappeared in the countryside between Foligno and Bavagna. The available records provide limited details regarding the precise circumstances surrounding his disappearance, and it is important to remain faithful to the documented facts. What is known is that his absence was quickly noticed and that efforts to locate him began almost immediately. Missing child cases create a unique kind of urgency. Every passing minute matters. Families search desperately for clues. Neighbors volunteer their time. Local authorities mobilize resources. Everyone hopes the explanation will prove innocent. Perhaps the child wandered away. Perhaps someone offered temporary assistance. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. Hope often survives long after fear has begun to grow. During the early stages of the search for Simone, those hopes remained alive. Volunteers examined nearby areas. Authorities organized search efforts. Residents followed developments anxiously. Somewhere within the community, people were undoubtedly reassuring one another that children are often found safely after disappearing. Yet while search teams worked to locate Simone, a deeply unsettling development was already underway. Before the child's body was discovered, police received an anonymous letter. The letter had been left inside a public telephone booth. Its contents immediately distinguished this case from countless other missing person investigations. The writer claimed responsibility for the crime. Even more disturbing, the letter reportedly contained information that only the perpetrator could have known. Most significantly, it described the location where Simone's body could be found. The existence of the letter transformed the entire investigation. Authorities were no longer dealing exclusively with a missing child. They were confronting the possibility that a killer had decided to communicate directly with them. Criminal investigations occasionally involve anonymous tips, false leads, or attempts by offenders to misdirect authorities. But this situation appeared fundamentally different. The writer was not merely providing information. He was claiming ownership of the crime itself. That fact carried enormous implications. If the writer truly possessed knowledge unavailable to the public, then investigators were looking at a direct communication from the murderer. Yet the letter contained another detail that would haunt both investigators and the public for months to come. The writer reportedly stated that he intended to kill again in the future. In hindsight, that threat would become one of the most chilling aspects of the entire case. At the time, however, authorities faced a difficult question. Was the threat genuine? Or was it merely the fantasy of a disturbed individual seeking attention? Without knowing the author's identity, there was no reliable way to answer that question. Shortly afterward, investigators located Simone's body in the area described within the letter. The discovery confirmed the authenticity of the information provided by the anonymous writer. The search for a missing child ended in tragedy. For Simone's family, the outcome represented the worst possible conclusion. For investigators, it marked the beginning of a homicide investigation unlike any they had anticipated. For the broader public, it introduced a terrifying possibility. A child killer was operating somewhere within their communities, and he remained unidentified. News of the crime spread rapidly. Newspapers covered developments extensively. Residents followed updates closely. The combination of a murdered child and a threatening letter captured public attention in a way few cases ever do. The killer's communication suggested not only violence, but confidence. He had chosen to reveal his existence while concealing his identity. That distinction mattered. Many offenders seek invisibility. This individual appeared to desire recognition without exposure. As weeks passed, the atmosphere throughout Umbria began to change. Fear rarely arrives all at once. Instead, it develops gradually. People begin making small adjustments. Parents become more cautious. Children are watched more closely. Activities once considered harmless are reconsidered. Over time, these individual decisions accumulate into broader social changes. According to reports from the period, many parents became reluctant to allow their children outside without supervision. The freedom that had characterized everyday life in many communities began to disappear. Residents discussed the case constantly. Rumors circulated. Theories emerged. Everyone wanted answers. Yet answers proved difficult to obtain. Investigators continued pursuing leads, but no clear suspect emerged. The anonymous letter remained one of the few concrete elements available to authorities. Meanwhile, the threat contained within that letter continued to linger over the region. The possibility of another attack became impossible to ignore. Every parent understood the implications. If the writer's claim was genuine, another child could already be at risk. Every day, without an arrest, intensified public anxiety. Every week that passed allowed fear to spread further. And every month that elapsed without a breakthrough strengthened the perception that the killer remained beyond the reach of law enforcement. Nearly a year passed after Simone's murder. Throughout that period, the unknown offender remained free. Communities attempted to resume normal life, but uncertainty persisted. The case continued to cast a shadow over daily routines. Then, in August 1993, the nightmare returned. On August 7th, 13-year-old Lorenzo Paolucci left home riding his bicycle. Like countless children his age, he expected an ordinary day. There is nothing to suggest that his departure would become part of a major criminal investigation. Yet Lorenzo never returned home. The significance of that fact became apparent with horrifying speed. Hours passed. Concern grew. Then came confirmation that every family in the region had feared since the anonymous letter appeared. Lorenzo was found dead near Casale in the Foligno area. The second murder changed everything. The first killing had introduced uncertainty. The second appeared to confirm a pattern. More importantly, it gave renewed significance to the warning contained in the letter following Simone's death. The threat to kill again had not been an empty boast. It had become reality. The psychological impact on the public cannot be overstated. During the months between the two murders, many residents had hoped that Simone's killing represented an isolated event. The second homicide shattered that hope. A child killer was no longer a theoretical possibility. The evidence suggested that he had returned. Fear expanded into something even more powerful: panic. Parents who had already been worried now felt justified in their concerns. The sense of vulnerability became impossible to ignore. Discussions about safety intensified. Trust diminished. The emotional burden on the community deepened. Newspapers devoted extensive attention to developments. Public pressure on investigators increased dramatically. Authorities now faced not one child homicide, but two. The expectation that they identify the perpetrator became overwhelming. Yet from the killer's perspective, something had changed as well. Criminal offenders often become more confident after avoiding capture. Success can create a false sense of invulnerability. The ability to evade law enforcement may encourage riskier behavior. While it is impossible to know precisely what Luigi Ciotti believed at the time, the second crime contained critical mistakes that would ultimately lead investigators directly to him. Unlike the earlier murder, the circumstances surrounding Lorenzo's death generated physical evidence that proved difficult to conceal. The killer had made errors, and those errors would soon become the turning point in the investigation. What makes the Lorenzo murder particularly significant within the broader narrative is not only its tragic outcome, but its role in exposing the individual responsible. The same crime that intensified public fear also created opportunities for investigators. The offender, who had remained hidden for nearly a year, suddenly became vulnerable. His actions left traces. His attempts to conceal evidence proved incomplete. The careful anonymity that had protected him following Simone's murder began to unravel. At the time, however, nobody yet understood how close authorities were to break through. Residents knew only that another child was dead. Families knew only that the threat had become reality. Investigators knew only that the pressure to solve the case had reached unprecedented levels. Somewhere beyond public view, detectives examined evidence, compared findings, and searched for connections. Unknown to the community, the path leading to the killer was already beginning to emerge. The second murder had not only fulfilled the promise contained in the anonymous letter, it had also initiated the sequence of events that would finally expose the man behind it. Soon, investigators would discover a trail that could not be ignored. Soon, attention would focus on a seemingly ordinary individual whose name had not previously dominated public discussion. Soon, the mystery surrounding the so-called monster of Foligno would begin to collapse under the weight of evidence. But before the arrest, before the confession, and before the courtroom battles that would follow, there was a critical investigative breakthrough. A breakthrough born from a series of mistakes. A breakthrough that transformed a year-long hunt into a rapidly closing net. And a breakthrough that would finally reveal the identity of the man who had terrorized Umbria and shattered the lives of two families forever. For nearly a year after the murder of Simone Allegretti, investigators in Umbria found themselves trapped in one of the most frustrating situations that law enforcement can face. They knew a child had been murdered. They knew the killer had communicated directly with authorities through an anonymous letter. They knew the author of that letter possessed information that only the perpetrator could have known. And they knew that the same individual had threatened to kill again. Yet despite all of those facts, they still did not know who they were looking for. The killer remained invisible. In many criminal investigations, detectives rely upon a combination of physical evidence, eyewitness accounts, and behavioral analysis. But the murder of Simone presented significant challenges. The crime scene itself offered only limited opportunities for identifying a suspect. The anonymous letter provided proof that the killer existed, but not proof of who he was. Investigators were left attempting to build a case around fragments of information while facing increasing public pressure to produce results. Every day that passed without an arrest strengthened public anxiety. Every week increased the possibility that the offender might strike again. The challenge facing investigators was not simply solving a murder. It was preventing another one. During the months following Simone's death, authorities pursued numerous leads. Like many high-profile child murder investigations, the case generated enormous public attention. With that attention came an unavoidable complication: false information. When a crime captures widespread interest, investigators often find themselves overwhelmed by reports, rumors, tips, and claims that ultimately lead nowhere. Some individuals genuinely believe they possess useful information. Others misinterpret innocent events as suspicious. And occasionally, certain people attempt to insert themselves into the investigation for reasons that have little to do with helping solve the crime. The Simone Allegretti investigation encountered precisely these difficulties. Potential suspects emerged and disappeared. Various leads demanded attention. Detectives examined possibilities, conducted interviews, and attempted to separate meaningful evidence from background noise. Yet despite their efforts, no clear path toward the killer emerged. The anonymous letter remained one of the most significant pieces of evidence, but it offered limited assistance in identifying its author. The writer had succeeded in revealing his existence while concealing his identity. Then came one of the stranger episodes in the investigation. A real estate agent named Stefano Spilotros attracted attention after contacting authorities and claiming to be the so-called monster of Foligno. On the surface, such a confession might appear to represent a major breakthrough. Investigators naturally had to take the claim seriously. When an individual admits responsibility for a murder, law enforcement cannot simply dismiss the statement without verification. Every confession must be examined carefully. Every claim must be tested against the available evidence. Yet experienced investigators understand that not all confessions are genuine. Throughout criminal history, there have been numerous cases involving false confessions. Some individuals seek attention. Others struggle with mental health issues. Still others become fascinated by high-profile crimes and convince themselves that participation in the investigation offers a sense of significance. Whatever the motivation, false confessions can consume valuable investigative resources while diverting attention from the real offender. In the Foligno case, authorities investigated Spilotros' claims. Ultimately, however, they concluded that he was not responsible for Simone's murder. Reports indicated that he was essentially a troubled individual seeking attention rather than the actual killer. The lead collapsed. Investigators found themselves back where they had started. The real murderer remained unidentified. Cases like this can create extraordinary pressure inside investigative teams. Detectives understand that every failed lead represents lost time. Every dead end delays justice. And in a case involving a threat of future violence, delays carry an even greater burden. Investigators were not merely trying to solve a crime that had already occurred. They were attempting to stop a potential future crime. As months passed, public concern intensified. Newspapers continued covering developments. Residents followed every update. Parents remained cautious. The threat contained within the anonymous letter never entirely disappeared from public consciousness. It lingered in the background, a constant reminder that the author had promised more violence, whether authorities admitted it publicly or not. The possibility of another attack undoubtedly weighed heavily on the investigation. Then, on August 7th, 1993, the fear that had haunted Umbria for nearly a year became reality. 13-year-old Lorenzo Paolucci disappeared after leaving home on his bicycle. The circumstances immediately raised alarm, given the unresolved murder of Simone Allegretti. Investigators could not ignore the possibility of a connection. Soon, the worst fears were confirmed. Lorenzo was found dead near Casale in the Foligno area. For the public, the second murder was devastating. For investigators, it represented both a tragedy and a turning point. The killer had struck again. But unlike the first crime, this time he made mistakes. Criminal investigations are often transformed by seemingly small details. A single overlooked clue can change the direction of an entire case. A minor error by an offender can accomplish what months of investigative effort could not. In the Lorenzo Paolucci murder, such an error appeared in the form of physical evidence. Investigators discovered a blood trail extending from the location where Lorenzo's body had been concealed. Blood evidence possesses unique value in criminal investigations because it reflects physical reality. Unlike witness memories, which can be incomplete or inaccurate, bloodstains provide tangible traces of movement and activity. The trail discovered near Lorenzo's body offered investigators something they had desperately needed for months: a direction, rather than beginning with a broad field of possibilities. Detectives could now follow an actual physical path. The blood trail led away from the scene. Investigators followed it carefully. Eventually, it directed them toward a nearby property. That property was a vacation home belonging to the family of Luigi Ciotti. At first glance, the discovery may not have seemed conclusive. Detectives still needed evidence connecting the location to the crime. But what they found upon further examination quickly elevated their suspicions. Inside the house, investigators noticed signs that someone had recently attempted to clean the premises. Reports indicated that portions of the floor appeared to have been washed hurriedly. In criminal investigations, rushed cleaning efforts often attract immediate attention because they can indicate attempts to destroy evidence. A freshly cleaned area is not necessarily proof of criminal activity. People clean their homes for countless innocent reasons. However, when such cleaning occurs in close proximity to a homicide investigation and follows a trail of blood leading directly to the location, the significance becomes impossible to ignore. Detectives recognized that they might finally be approaching the person responsible. The vacation home became a focal point of the investigation. Authorities conducted a more extensive search. What followed proved decisive. During the examination of the property, investigators reportedly discovered evidence linking the location not only to Lorenzo Paolucci's murder, but also to the earlier killing of Simone Allegretti. This development fundamentally changed the nature of the case. Until that moment, investigators had been dealing with two separate crimes connected primarily by suspicion and circumstance. The evidence discovered during the search created a direct link. It suggested that the same individual was responsible for both murders. More importantly, it narrowed the focus of the investigation dramatically. The circle of suspicion was no longer broad and uncertain. It was closing around a specific person. Luigi Ciotti now found himself at the center of the investigation. The significance of the discovery cannot be overstated. For nearly a year, the author of the anonymous letter had remained hidden. Detectives had chased leads. They had evaluated suspects. They had investigated false confessions. Yet none of those efforts had produced a definitive breakthrough. Now, suddenly, physical evidence appeared to connect one location, one family property, and one individual to both murders. The investigation accelerated rapidly. The evidence recovered during the search gave authorities confidence that they were finally confronting the right suspect. The months of uncertainty were coming to an end. On August 8, 1993, just one day after Lorenzo Paolucci's murder, Luigi Ciotti was arrested. The speed of events reflected the strength of the emerging case. Detectives no longer viewed him as merely one possibility among many. They viewed him as the most likely perpetrator behind both child murders. Yet an arrest alone does not conclude an investigation. Authorities still needed answers. They needed admissions. They needed to understand the extent of his involvement. And they needed confirmation that the man sitting before them was indeed the mysterious author of the letter that had terrorized Umbria for nearly a year. The interrogations that followed became the final stage of the investigative process. Initially, Ciotti denied responsibility. Such denials are not unusual. Many suspects attempt to distance themselves from incriminating evidence, particularly during the earliest phases of questioning. investigators continued presenting the evidence collected during their search. Piece by piece, the case against him grew stronger. The physical evidence, the circumstances surrounding Lorenzo's murder, and the material linking him to Simone's death combined to create overwhelming pressure. Eventually, the denials collapsed. Luigi Ciotti confessed. He admitted responsibility for the murders of both Simone Allegretti and Lorenzo Paolucci. He also acknowledged what investigators had long suspected. He was the anonymous figure behind the letter, the individual who had directed authorities towards Simone's body, the individual who had threatened future violence, the individual who had become known throughout Italy as the monster of Foligno. For investigators, the confession represented the culmination of months of work. For the public, it brought a mixture of relief and horror. Relief because the killer had finally been identified. Relief because the unknown threat haunting the region now had a name and a face. But horror remained because the reality proved so disturbing. The murderer was not an invisible monster lurking beyond society. He was a real person who had lived among ordinary people. Like many notorious criminal cases, the Foligno investigation ultimately revealed a difficult truth. The most frightening offenders are often not those who appear dangerous. They are the ones who blend into everyday life, the ones nobody notices, the ones nobody fears until it is too late. Yet although the investigation had solved the mystery of the killer's identity, many questions remained unanswered. Why had he committed the murders? What role had his psychological condition played? Was he fully responsible for his actions? And how should the Italian justice system respond to crimes that had traumatized an entire region? Those questions would soon move from police interrogation rooms to a courtroom in Perugia, where one of Italy's most closely watched criminal trials would attempt to determine not only what Luigi Ciotti had done, but also how society should judge him for it. By the time Luigi Ciotti entered the courtroom, much of Italy already knew his name. For nearly a year, the mysterious figure known only as the Monster of Foligno had existed as a shadow hanging over Umbria. Parents had feared him without knowing his identity. Investigators had pursued him without knowing his face. Journalists had written about him while relying on speculation and fragments of evidence. Now that uncertainty was gone, the anonymous author of the letter had been identified. The man responsible for the murders of Simone Allegretti and Lorenzo Paolucci had confessed. Yet despite the apparent clarity of the case, the judicial process that followed would reveal that some of the most difficult questions were still unresolved. Criminal trials are often imagined as battles over facts. Did the accused commit the crime? Is the evidence sufficient? Can guilt be proven beyond reasonable doubt? In many cases, those questions dominate the proceedings. The trial of Luigi Ciotti was different. The basic facts had become increasingly difficult to dispute following his confession and the evidence discovered during the investigation. Instead, attention gradually shifted toward another issue, one that frequently generates controversy whenever severe crimes intersect with questions of mental health. If a person commits horrific acts while suffering from psychological disorders, how should the justice system respond? The answer to that question would become one of the defining themes of the proceedings. On December 1st, 1994, Luigi Ciotti's trial began in Perugia. Public interest was enormous. The murders had shocked the nation. 2 children had lost their lives. An entire region had spent months living under the threat of an unidentified child killer. Newspapers closely followed developments. Television coverage amplified public attention. For many observers, the courtroom represented more than a legal venue. It represented an opportunity to understand how such crimes could have occurred in the first place. Yet some questions are easier to ask than to answer. As the proceedings unfolded, prosecutors presented the evidence connecting Ciotti to both murders. The investigation had already produced a powerful narrative. The first crime had involved the murder of 4-year-old Simone Allegretti and the anonymous letter. directing authorities to the child's body. The second crime had involved 13-year-old Lorenzo Paolucci and the critical mistakes that led investigators directly to Ciotti's family vacation home. The search of that property had uncovered evidence linking him to both cases. His eventual confession had reinforced the conclusions investigators had already reached. Together, those elements formed the foundation of the prosecution's case. The significance of the confession cannot be overstated. In criminal proceedings, confessions often carry enormous evidentiary weight. However, courts rarely rely on confessions alone. Investigators and prosecutors generally seek corroboration through physical evidence, witness testimony, and other supporting material. In Ciotti's case, the confession did not stand in isolation. It existed alongside the evidence discovered during the investigation. This combination strengthened the prosecution's position considerably. Yet while the factual case appeared powerful, the defense focused attention on a different area. Rather than attempting to deny the crimes outright, legal arguments increasingly centered on Ciotti's psychological condition. During the proceedings, experts examined his mental state and personal history. Discussions emerged regarding his childhood experiences, his social isolation, and the emotional difficulties that reportedly characterized much of his life. Among the issues raised were claims that he had been abandoned shortly after birth, spent his early years in an orphanage, and may have suffered abuse while living there. These details became part of a broader effort to understand his psychological development. Importantly, however, the courtroom debate was not about whether difficult experiences had occurred. It was about their legal significance. Courts are often asked to distinguish between explanation and responsibility. Understanding why someone may have developed psychological problems is not the same as determining whether they should be held accountable for criminal conduct. That distinction became central to the trial. Mental health experts played an increasingly important role in the proceedings. According to the findings presented during the broader legal process, specialists identified what was described as a pathological fixation on young boys. Such conclusions helped explain why investigators viewed Ciotti as particularly dangerous. The evaluation suggested that his crimes were not random acts, but reflected deeply rooted psychological disturbances. Yet another question immediately followed. Did those disturbances reduce his legal responsibility? This issue lies at the heart of many controversial criminal cases. Most legal systems recognize that severe mental illness can affect an individual's ability to understand actions or control behavior. However, determining the extent of that impact is rarely straightforward. Psychological conditions exist on a spectrum. Some individuals are considered fully responsible for their actions despite mental health challenges. Others may be deemed incapable of exercising normal judgment. Many cases fall somewhere between those extremes. The trial of Luigi Ciotti became one of those difficult middle ground cases. Prosecutors emphasized the severity of the crimes and the suffering inflicted upon the victims and their families. 2 children had been murdered. A community had been terrorized. The anonymous letter demonstrated planning and awareness. The efforts to conceal evidence following Lorenzo Paolucci's murder suggested consciousness of wrongdoing. These factors supported the argument that Ciotti understood the nature of his actions. The defense, meanwhile, highlighted evidence of psychological dysfunction. The discussion was not necessarily about innocence. Rather, it focused on whether mental illness had impaired his capacity in a manner significant enough to influence sentencing. For observers following the trial, the debate reflected a broader societal tension. People generally agree that serious crimes require accountability. Yet societies also recognize that mental illness can complicate questions of blame and punishment. Finding the appropriate balance between those principles remains one of the most challenging tasks faced by modern legal systems. Throughout the proceedings, emotions remained intense. The victims' families continued living with irreversible loss. The names Simone Allegretti and Lorenzo Paolucci remained at the center of the case. Every legal argument unfolded against the backdrop of two stolen childhoods. Every discussion of psychology occurred alongside the reality that two families would never see their children again. This tension gave the proceedings much of their emotional weight. On December 28, 1994, the court delivered its initial verdict. Luigi Ciotti was convicted for both murders. The sentence was severe, 2 life terms in prison. For many members of the public, the decision represented a clear statement regarding the gravity of the crimes. 2 murdered children, 2 life sentences. The outcome appeared to reflect the extraordinary seriousness of the case. Yet the legal process was not over. Criminal proceedings involving major cases often continue through appeals, and Ciotti's case proved no exception. The appeal stage introduced new complexities into the public conversation. In 1996, an appellate court reached a conclusion that would become one of the most controversial aspects of the entire case. The court determined that Ciotti suffered from what was described as a partial mental disorder, sometimes referred to as semi-mental illness. This finding did not absolve him of responsibility. The court did not declare him innocent, nor did it conclude that he lacked all understanding of his actions. Instead, it recognized a degree of psychological impairment that was considered legally significant. The practical consequence of that conclusion was dramatic. The original sentence of 2 life terms was reduced. Instead of life imprisonment, Ciotti received a 30-year prison sentence. Predictably, reactions were divided. For some observers, the decision reflected an appropriate application of legal principles. If mental health experts had identified genuine psychological impairment, then the court had a responsibility to consider that evidence. Justice, from this perspective, required more than punishment alone. It required an accurate assessment of the defendant's condition. Others viewed the decision very differently. To critics, the reduction appeared far too lenient given the nature of the crimes. 2 children had been murdered. Entire communities had lived in fear. The emotional weight of those realities made any sentence reduction difficult for many people to accept. The controversy highlighted an enduring challenge within criminal justice systems. Legal judgments are not always designed to satisfy public emotions. Courts must apply laws, standards of evidence, and established principles, even when the resulting decisions prove unpopular. This tension often becomes especially visible in cases involving mental health defenses or mitigating psychological conditions. The debate surrounding Ciotti's sentence reflected exactly that dynamic. The legal process reached another milestone in 1997 when Italy's highest court upheld the appellate decision. The reduction to 30 years remained in place. With that ruling, the major legal battles effectively came to an end. The judicial system had spoken. Luigi Ciotti would serve a lengthy prison sentence rather than spend the remainder of his life behind bars under the original judgment. Yet even though the formal legal questions had largely been resolved, broader concerns persisted. Many people wondered what would happen after the sentence ended. Could someone responsible for such crimes ever be considered safe for release? Could treatment reduce the risks identified by mental health experts? And what role should public safety play when evaluating offenders whose crimes involve children? Those questions would not become urgent immediately. Decades of imprisonment still lay ahead. Nevertheless, the seeds of future controversy had already been planted. The appellate court's findings regarding mental health would continue influencing discussions long after the trial itself concluded. For the families of Simone Allegretti and Lorenzo Paolucci, however, no legal outcome could fully resolve the loss they had endured. Courtrooms can determine guilt. Judges can impose sentences. Appeals can modify punishments. But none of those actions can restore a life that has been taken. In many ways, that reality remained the most important truth beneath the legal arguments. While experts debated psychological diagnoses and courts evaluated sentencing standards, 2 children remained absent from every future birthday, every future family gathering, and every future milestone. Their families carried that absence long after media attention faded. The trial of Luigi Ciotti, therefore, became more than a legal proceeding. It became a case study in how societies confront crimes that seem almost impossible to understand. It forced courts to balance accountability with psychological evidence. It challenged the public to grapple with uncomfortable questions about responsibility and mental illness. And it ensured that the story of the monster of Foligno would remain part of Italy's criminal history for decades to come. Yet even after the verdicts, the appeals, and the prison sentence, the story was not entirely finished. Years later, another debate would emerge, one that asked whether Luigi Ciotti remained a danger to society and whether a man who had spent decades behind bars could ever truly leave the shadow of the crimes that had defined his life. That final chapter would become just as controversial as the trial itself. When a major criminal case reaches its verdict, there is often a temptation to view that moment as the ending. The suspect has been identified. The trial has concluded. The sentence has been imposed. From a legal perspective, the case appears finished. Yet for the people most deeply affected by violent crime, the story rarely ends when the courtroom empties. Families continue living with loss. Communities continue carrying memories. And society remains confronted by questions that no judicial decision can fully answer. The case of Luigi Ciotti was no exception. If anything, the years following his conviction demonstrated that some of the most difficult debates surrounding the monster of Foligno would emerge long after the headlines of the 1990s faded from public attention. By the conclusion of the appeals process, the legal framework appeared settled. Ciotti had been convicted for the murders of Simone Allegretti and Lorenzo Paolucci. His original sentence of 2 life terms had been reduced following appellate findings regarding partial mental illness. The Italian Supreme Court ultimately upheld that decision. The legal battle was over. The sentence stood. For decades, Luigi Ciotti remained incarcerated. During those years, Italy changed. New generations grew up. Political landscapes shifted. Technology transformed daily life. Criminal cases that once dominated newspapers gradually disappeared from front pages. As happens with many notorious crimes, public attention slowly moved elsewhere. Yet the names Simone Allegretti and Lorenzo Paolucci never disappeared entirely. For those who remembered the events of 1992 and 1993, the murders remained among the most disturbing child homicide cases in modern Italian history. The passage of time often creates an illusion of distance. Looking back across decades, people sometimes begin to perceive past crimes as historical events rather than human tragedies. But for the families involved, time functions differently. Years pass, yet absence remains. Children who should have become adults never reach adulthood. Milestones that should have occurred never arrive. The calendar continues moving forward while certain wounds remain permanently tied to a specific moment in the past. In that sense, the aftermath of the Foligno murders never truly ended. It simply evolved. One of the most significant developments occurred in 2015. By that point, Ciotti had completed the prison term resulting from the judicial decisions of the 1990s. Under ordinary circumstances, the completion of a sentence might lead directly to release. However, authorities faced an extraordinary question. What should happen when an individual convicted of murdering children is still considered potentially dangerous decades later? This issue sits at the intersection of criminal justice, psychology, ethics, and public safety. Modern legal systems generally recognize that punishment alone cannot always resolve concerns regarding future risk, In certain circumstances, particularly when serious mental health issues remain present, authorities may determine that continued supervision or treatment is necessary. Chiati's case became a prominent example of that dilemma. Rather than being fully released upon completion of his sentence, he was transferred to a REMS facility in Sardinia. REMS facilities are forensic psychiatric treatment centers designed for individuals whose mental health conditions require specialized management within a judicial framework. The decision reflected the conclusions of professionals who continued evaluating Chiati's condition. It also reflected broader concerns about community safety. To many members of the public, the transfer raised immediate questions. Hadn't he completed his sentence? If the legal punishment had ended, why was further confinement considered necessary? The answer lay in the distinction between punishment and risk management. Courts and mental health experts were no longer focusing exclusively on crimes committed decades earlier. They were evaluating the possibility of future behavior. Such assessments are inherently difficult. No expert can predict the future with absolute certainty. Psychologists, psychiatrists, and courts must instead rely on available evidence. Behavioral observations, clinical evaluations, and historical patterns. These assessments are not about certainty. They are about probability and risk. In Chiati's case, subsequent evaluations continued producing troubling conclusions. In both 2018 and 2020, judicial reviews reportedly determined that he remained a potential danger to society. As a result, authorities extended the period of supervised psychiatric treatment. The decisions generated renewed public discussion. Whenever notorious offenders approach potential release, societies often revisit the same difficult questions. Can someone who committed terrible crimes decades ago change fundamentally? How should courts balance individual rights against public safety concerns? At what point does continued detention become unjustified? There are no universally accepted answers. Different legal systems address these issues in different ways. Different experts often reach different conclusions. Yet the Foligno case possessed characteristics that made the debate particularly sensitive. The victims had been children. The crimes had involved profound violence. And according to reports cited in later judicial evaluations, one factor continued to concern specialists above all others. Multiple assessments indicated that Chiati had never demonstrated genuine remorse for the murders. This observation became one of the most frequently discussed aspects of the post-conviction period. Remorse occupies a unique position within criminal justice. It is not always legally required. A person can be convicted regardless of whether they express regret. Yet expressions of remorse often influence how society interprets rehabilitation. When offenders acknowledge the suffering they caused, many people view that acknowledgement as evidence of personal change. When such acknowledgement appears absent, concerns about future risk may increase. According to assessments referenced in media reports and judicial records, experts remained troubled by what they perceived as a lack of authentic remorse, whether viewed through a psychological lens or a public safety lens. That conclusion carried significant implications. It suggested that the passage of time alone had not necessarily resolved the deeper concerns surrounding the case. As a result, the debate regarding Chiati's future continued long after his prison sentence ended. The controversy itself reveals something important about society's relationship with violent crime. Most people are comfortable discussing punishment. The concept is relatively straightforward. A crime occurs, a sentence is imposed, time is served, but rehabilitation is more complicated. Rehabilitation requires society to confront uncomfortable uncertainties. Can individuals change? How can change be measured? What level of risk is acceptable? And who should bear responsibility if experts make the wrong prediction? These questions become even more difficult when the underlying crimes involve vulnerable victims, such as children. In many respects, the continued supervision of Luigi Ciotti reflected the enduring gravity of the original murders. Decades after Simone Allegretti and Lorenzo Paolucci lost their lives, institutions were still grappling with the consequences. The legal proceedings had ended. The prison sentence had been completed. Yet the concerns generated by those crimes remained active. This reality helps explain why the case continues to occupy a prominent place in discussions of Italian criminal history. The murders are frequently mentioned alongside other notorious cases, not because of sensationalism, but because they raised enduring questions about violence, mental illness, accountability, and public safety. The story of the Monster of Foligno is therefore not merely the story of one offender. It is also the story of a community confronting fear. It is the story of investigators struggling through uncertainty before finally finding answers. It is the story of a justice system attempting to balance punishment with psychiatric evidence. And it is the story of families whose losses can never be reversed. Perhaps the most important lesson emerging from the case involves the fragility of perceived safety. Before October 1992, many families in Umbria viewed their communities as places where children could move freely and securely. After the murders, that confidence was profoundly shaken. The crimes demonstrated how quickly ordinary assumptions can be overturned. They revealed that danger does not always announce itself clearly. Sometimes it exists behind an ordinary appearance. Sometimes it remains hidden until irreversible harm has occurred. Yet there is another lesson as well. Cases such as this often generate fascination with offenders. Society seeks explanations. Journalists analyze motives. Psychologists examine backgrounds. Courts evaluate mental states. These efforts can be valuable because understanding criminal behavior helps prevent future harm. But there's always a risk that attention drifts away from the people who suffered most. In the case of Luigi Ciotti, the central figures should never be the man who committed the crimes. The central figures should be the children whose futures were taken away. Simone Allegretti was 4 years old. Lorenzo Paolucci was 13. Everything that followed, the investigation, the trial, the psychiatric evaluations, the decades of legal debate, occurred because those two children never had the opportunity to continue their lives. Their families carried the consequences. Their communities carried the memories. And their names remain inseparable from the history of the case. More than 3 decades after the murders, the questions surrounding rehabilitation, risk, and justice continue to provoke discussion. Reasonable people may disagree about the answers. Some will focus on punishment. Others will emphasize treatment. Some will prioritize public safety above all else. Others will stress legal principles and individual rights. Such debates are likely to continue for many years. What remains beyond dispute is the impact of the crimes themselves. 2 young lives were lost. A region lived under fear. A community's sense of security was shattered. And a case that began with an anonymous letter became one of the most infamous child murder investigations in Italy's modern history. In the end, the title Monster of Foligno survived because it captured public horror at what had occurred. But history should remember something more important than the nickname attached to the killer. It should remember the names that existed before the headlines, before the investigation, before the trial, and before the decades of controversy that followed. Because long after the legal arguments have faded and long after the debates about Luigi Ciotti have ended, the people most worthy of remembrance remain the 2 children whose lives were stolen. Simone Allegretti, Lorenzo Paolucci. Their stories are the true reason this case is remembered at all. Long after the police files were closed, long after the courtroom arguments ended, and long after the name Luigi Ciotti became permanently associated with one of Italy's most disturbing child murder cases, a quieter story continued to exist beneath the surface of the public record. It is the story that exists after the headlines. The story that remains when television crews leave, when newspaper coverage fades, and when the public gradually shifts its attention toward newer tragedies. For many people, criminal cases seem to have clear endings. An arrest is made. A conviction follows. A sentence is imposed. Justice, at least in a legal sense, appears to have been served. Reality is rarely that simple. The Foligno case demonstrates why. The murders of Simone Allegretti and Lorenzo Paolucci were not events that ended with a verdict. Their consequences extended outward through years, decades, and generations. The legal system could identify the offender. It could determine responsibility. It could impose punishment, but it could not restore what had been lost. That limitation is perhaps the most important truth in the entire story. Every criminal justice system is built around the idea of accountability. Courts establish facts. Judges issue rulings. Sentences communicate society's condemnation of certain acts. These functions matter. They are essential. Yet even the most effective justice system cannot reverse time. It cannot return a child to a family. It cannot erase grief. It cannot rebuild the future that disappeared alongside a victim. In many ways, the story of the monster of Foligno forces us to confront that uncomfortable reality. Throughout the investigation, public attention focused on identifying the killer. Who wrote the letter? Who murdered Simone Allegretti? Who later killed Lorenzo Paolucci? Could the offender be found before another child was harmed? These questions dominated the case for nearly a year. Once Luigi Ciotti was arrested, however, a different set of questions emerged. How could someone commit such crimes? What role had his troubled background played in his development? What significance should be attached to claims regarding abandonment, isolation, emotional instability, and alleged abuse during childhood? What did psychiatric evaluations reveal about his mental state? And perhaps most controversially, how should society balance punishment with psychological explanations? These questions remain relevant because they reflect challenges that extend far beyond a single case. Modern societies often struggle to understand violent offenders. People naturally search for explanations. We want causes. We want patterns. We want to believe that if we can identify the origins of violence, we can prevent it from occurring again. Yet cases like this remind us that understanding is not the same as excusing. The details of Ciotti's upbringing became part of the public discussion because they helped experts analyze his psychological development. But those details never changed the central facts. 2 children were murdered. 2 families suffered unimaginable loss. 2 lives ended before they had the opportunity to truly begin. That distinction matters. When discussing notorious crimes, there's always a danger that the offender becomes the main character. The public studies his history. Researchers analyze his behavior. Journalists examine his motivations. Gradually, the person who committed the crime can receive more attention than the people who suffered because of it. The Foligno case serves as a reminder that this perspective can become distorted. The most important people in this story were never the investigators, the lawyers, the psychiatrists, the judges, or even the killer himself. The most important people were the children. Simone Allegretti, Lorenzo Paolucci. Everything else happened because of what happened to them. When viewed from that perspective, the entire case takes on a different meaning. The anonymous letter becomes more than a chilling communication from a killer. It becomes a moment that deepened the suffering of a grieving community. The investigation becomes more than a hunt for a suspect. It becomes an effort to prevent further harm. The trial becomes more than a legal proceeding. It becomes a public attempt to understand an event that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. And the later debates regarding mental illness, treatment, and public safety become more than technical legal discussions. They become questions about how society protects its most vulnerable members. Perhaps that is one reason the case continues to be remembered decades later. Not because it involved a notorious offender, not because of the media attention, not because of the frightening nickname that newspapers attached to the killer. Rather, it is remembered because it touched upon fears that exist in every society. The fear of violence against children, the fear of hidden danger, the fear that someone who appears ordinary may be capable of extraordinary cruelty. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Foligno case was precisely this sense of normality. According to the available record, Luigi Ciotti did not present himself as the stereotypical image of a monster. He did not resemble the fictional villains often portrayed in films and novels. Instead, he appeared outwardly ordinary. History repeatedly demonstrates that this is often the most disturbing reality of all. Human beings prefer clear distinctions between good and evil. We prefer obvious warning signs. We want dangerous people to look dangerous. But criminal investigations frequently reveal something different. The most frightening offenders are often hidden behind appearances that seem entirely unremarkable. This realization can be deeply unsettling because it challenges our assumptions about safety. The residents of Umbria experienced exactly that challenge. Before the murders, many families viewed their communities as places where children could move freely. Afterward, those assumptions changed. Parents became more cautious. Communities became more vigilant. The sense of security that once felt natural suddenly appeared fragile. Even after the arrest, some of those changes remained. Fear leaves traces. Communities recover, but they rarely return to exactly the same state that existed before a traumatic event. The memory becomes part of local history. Stories are passed from one generation to the next. People remember where they were when they first heard the news. They remember the searches. They remember the uncertainty. They remember the relief when the killer was identified. And they remember the sadness that followed. In this way, the case became larger than a criminal investigation. It became part of the collective memory of a region. The years that followed only reinforced that status. The continued legal discussions regarding Ciotti's confinement after the completion of his sentence ensured that the case periodically returned to public attention. Each new evaluation raised familiar questions. Had he changed? Did he remain dangerous? Should society continue restricting his freedom? These debates often produce strong opinions. Yet beneath those disagreements remained a shared recognition that the original crimes were extraordinarily serious. No matter where people stood on questions of punishment or treatment, few disputed the lasting impact of the murders themselves. That impact is ultimately what defines the legacy of the case. Not the legal rulings, not the psychiatric terminology, not the media coverage. The legacy lies in the lives that were interrupted and the lessons that followed. The story of the monster of Foligno is frequently categorized as true crime. That label is accurate, but it can also be limiting, because at its core, this is not merely a crime story. It is a story about vulnerability. It is a story about fear. It is a story about loss. And it is a story about the difficult responsibility society carries when attempting to balance justice, compassion, accountability, and public safety. More than 30 years have passed since Simone Allegretti disappeared. More than 30 years have passed since Lorenzo Paolucci left home on his bicycle and never returned. Time has moved forward. Italy has changed. The world has changed. Yet the essential questions raised by the case remain remarkably familiar. How do communities protect children? How do institutions respond to dangerous individuals? How should mental illness be considered within criminal justice systems? Can rehabilitation be measured? Can risk ever be eliminated completely? And how should victims be remembered once public attention fades? There may never be perfect answers to those questions. But perhaps the value of revisiting cases like this lies not in finding definitive solutions. Perhaps the value lies in remembering. Remembering the investigation that pursued the truth despite uncertainty. Remembering the families who endured unimaginable grief. Remembering the communities that refused to accept fear as the final word. And most importantly, remembering the two young lives at the center of everything. Because when the documents are archived, when the court records gather dust, and when the arguments about Luigi Ciotti eventually become the subject of history rather than current events, those names should remain, not as symbols, not as statistics, but as children. Children who deserved futures. Children who deserved safety. Children who deserve the chance to grow older. The story of Luigi Ciotti may be remembered as the story of a monster of Foligno. But the true ending belongs elsewhere. It belongs to Simone Allegretti. It belongs to Lorenzo Paolucci. And it belongs to the enduring obligation to remember them not for the way they died, but for the simple fact that they should have been allowed to live.